Okay, so now I want to go through some examples of how we are going to do synthesis, specifically synthesis reactions or uh, problems that involve carbon-carbon bond formation as mediated by acetylide ion nucleophiles. So let's first analyze the synthesis of this cis alkene retrosynthetically, where you can see that these hydrogens have been newly added to the compound in a cis manner. So these have been added via a syn addition, or we've produced the Z-alkene. And that could have been done if we would have had a alkyne starting material. And to that alkyne, you would add a hydrogen source along with a poison catalyst that will stop at the Z-alkene and will not exhaustively hydrogenate it down to an alkane. So Lindlar's palladium is that poison catalyst that will do your Z olefin formation.